So let's go back to that story of patients potentially being found guilty of discrimination if they refuse the care of a transgender doctor or a nurse. This is according to new NHS guidelines. Patients could find themselves in hot water. Health bosses have warned that patients have no right to be told a healthcare worker's assigned sex at birth. However, transgender health workers can choose not to treat patients if they feel uncomfortable doing so, according to the report by the NHS Confederation. The report, published earlier this month in partnership with the LGBT Foundation, says patients can only request care from a same-sex staff member in limited circumstances, such as if they are having an intimate examination. It states that when a patient requests an employee administering care to be a woman or a man, the comfort of the staff member should be prioritised. Slightly disturbed by that. The report goes on to say that patients with dementia should still be challenged if they express discriminatory views about transgender staff, while their relatives may be removed from the premises if they do the same. Let's speak on this too. I pause there. There's no dramatic effect there. I'm simply digesting the enormity of this. Helen Joyce is the author of Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, and Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters. Helen, good afternoon to you. I'm sure I can almost hear you sharing my incredulity at some of this. It's almost another classic establishment case here. All of the emphasis is on everybody but the people that really matter here, which are the patients.
I wish I felt incredulous about it. What I feel is livid. I expect this sort of thing by now, but it's an absolute disgrace. This guidance is downright evil. I don't hesitate to use that word. It's calling people prejudiced against trans people when actually what they're doing is they are stating their own boundaries, which depend on them being able to say whether another person is male or female. A woman doesn't have to be having intimate care. It might be a procedure, for example, for an Orthodox Jewish woman or for a Muslim woman or for a woman who's traumatized by having experienced domestic violence and isn't willing to be alone in such a situation with a man. And she's being touched. Her body is being touched. It doesn't have to be, her genitals, specifically her breasts. And she says, I am only willing to have this care from a woman. She doesn't mind how that woman identifies, but she doesn't want a man, and that man's identity feelings do not override her physical boundaries. That's the law. And what the NHS Confederation is doing here is it is presenting something that is legally illiterate and arguably is telling NHS foundations to tell their trans-identified staff to commit sexual assault in order to validate their identities. I am livid.
Yeah, and I can hear that, and I think most people would understand that. Of course, this is one of those classic moments as well, Helen, that when you go back to the Federation, they'll say, oh, it's just guidance, and well, perhaps now they've been challenged, and robust voices and very honest voices such as your own, that's when you start to get the sort of slightly rowing back a bit. Have we heard any more in that respect?
Well, they were warned before they put this out to tender. Sex Matters wrote to them and said that the tender was wrongly constituted, that they kept talking about people's identities and discriminating against trans people instead of centering sex, male and female, and centering the experience and rights and boundaries of patients. The staff comes secondary, as you said. And we did get an answer from them. They didn't actually register what we were saying. They went ahead with it. And unsurprisingly, this unqualified extremist organisation has come back with this horrific guidance. And the British Medical Association has said similar things, by the way, as well, that patients do not have the right to know the sex of the person who is treating them if that person doesn't identify as their sex. So this is all over. And I don't want this to be left to legal challenges taken by traumatised women who have been assaulted. I want the government to sort this out by saying that sex in the Equality Act means sex. It means male or female. It means the thing that you are when you were born and that you will be all your life until you die. That's our petition, Sex Matters petition to the government to fix the Equality Act so we stop seeing this sort of nonsense.
There is a kind of a spectrum here, though, Helen, and this confuses me, and do help us out on this, and you'll be familiar with this scenario. There may well be somebody who simply, for whatever reason, decides they are X, Y or Z when they clearly aren't. But there might be somebody who, at the age of 22, changed their gender in the sense of having all the surgical procedures. In addition to that, they went through the legal ramifications so that their passport and everything identifies them. Previously born a man, now a female, lives as a female. No one around them knows they're not a female. They look like a female, they have breasts and all the rest of it. Is that person the same as somebody, I don't know, a man standing there with a beard saying identify as a woman? Is it exactly the same thing?
I mean, what you're asking is whether somebody who passes as a member of the opposite sex can be allowed to lie to patients when someone who can't pass as a member of the opposite sex can be allowed to lie to patients. I'm in the position that nobody should lie to patients. I don't mind what other people identify as. I don't mind what medical procedures they undergo.
But if they're legally a woman at that point, whatever you or I think about that, but legally all the documentation says they're female.
About 6,000 people have a thing called a gender recognition certificate that recognises that for a few specific legal purposes, they count as members of the opposite sex. Those do not include overriding other people's consent. The law cannot do that. It means that if they get married, or they can change their birth certificate with a piece of paper that says they're members of the opposite sex. We cannot, in fact, turn male people into females. That cannot be done for any mammalian species, and we are mammals. So no, it is not okay to lie to patients, even if you think you can get away with it.
And if that person is, living as a woman, thinking as a woman, then, a lawyer in this case would say it would be unthinkable that they would be, wishing harm on anybody. They've gone into the medical profession. They've been a 20-year consultant as that gender. Their colleagues know them as that. They have no nefarious purpose, so what would be the harm?
I'm not trying to say that people are trying to cause harm. I'm saying that it's about somebody else's consent.
True.
If I say that I don't want a male person touching me, I'm not casting aspersions on that male person. I'm just saying I don't want a male person touching me. Yeah. I don't think you can live as a woman when you are a man either. I just don't think it's possible. All women are women, all men are men. Everything that I do is something that a woman does because I'm a woman. A man who goes through an operation, a man who gets paperwork, a man who thinks of himself a certain way, he is still a man. I don't mind how he thinks of himself. He can do that. But when it comes to my body, my healthcare, it's what I think that matters. Yeah. And it's my boundaries, not his.
Well, as I said at the beginning, in the intros, you probably heard, Helen, I think these decisions are about what the patient should be able to make this, not some boardroom somewhere where they've concocted this. Who knows what their thinking was on this? There seems to be a rush almost to wheel out legislation that no one's actually asked for. But there is this strange groupthink amongst this very small but perfectly formed contingent of people that seem hell-bent on inventing new laws and phrases and ideas about, what gender is and how it functions.
It's also this idea that the rest of us are there to validate people's identities. I don't have strong feelings about other people's beliefs about themselves or about God or about anything else like that. It's fine. They can go ahead. They can do themselves. But when it comes to me, my healthcare, my body, it's my perceptions and my boundaries and my consent that matter. And everyone understood this until about a half a second ago. And now suddenly the important person in the consulting room is the doctor or the nurse.
Yes.
No,
yeah, and that's
they
weren't even hiding that on the statement either. I mean, that's what I find curious. I mean, they're almost proud of this fact.
Because they think the patients, they think the women are there to validate the men's identities.
Yeah. There it is. Helen, very thorough stuff. I think you'll have a lot of support for everything you said there. Helen Joyce is author of Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, also director of advocacy at Sex Matters. I know that, there will be people squealing and saying, what's she talking about? And I know there are many trans people that will listen to that and think it sounds unfair. But the overarching point that she makes, which I think is difficult to really argue, is that this is down to the patient. This stuff is down to the patient, surely.